my faith will stand. And I will call upon your name, where feet may fail, and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours. You are mine. Your grace abounds in deepest waters. Your sovereign hand will be my guide. My feet may fail, and fear surrounds me. You've never failed, and you won't stop now. In deepest waters, so I will call upon your name, be my guide, and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you should call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence
Hi,
of
Angela.
my Savior.
Hi, Denzel. How are you?
When my trust is without borders, let me walk
good.
upon the waters wherever
Went all right?
you call me.
Yeah,
Take me
this is half an hour.
No, I know, but I was thinking to myself, we just don't know what will come up. Went all right? This is for 30 minutes, so this session is 30 minutes.
Eyes above the waves, my soul will rest in your embrace. I am yours, and you are mine. Eyes above the waves, my soul will rest in your embrace. I am yours, and you are mine. You call me out upon the waters.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me say welcome to some people call it plenary, so that's what I'll call it for today. We have a lot that we want to get through today. I want to definitely say thank you to all of our facilitators who have so ably shared their knowledge with all of us today. So we're going to be using WhatsApp chat, of course. So please, if you have any questions, if you would put a capital Q in front of your question, and then I'll be able to take some of the questions. And then if you put a C, or just simply write any comments that you want. So it just makes it clearer of what we're going to do. So we haven't got a whole heap of time, so I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to start with Dr. Labinjo, and I am going to ask all of the facilitators in no more than 2 minutes to just give a summary of what your workshop was about. So Dr. Labinjo, I'll start with you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It was basically a finding out what is drugs and alcohol and what is it about, how does it impact society, how can you spot problems, but more to the point, what can you do about them? And some of the questions were very thought-provoking, and I believe that we imparted a lot of knowledge that we can use to impact people that we come across.
It would help if I unmute myself as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Labinjo. They're going to sack me before I've even started. All right, Sister Selina, I believe you did the youth workshop. So can you just give us a couple of minutes about what your main points were that you covered?
Yeah, thank you so much. Denisha and I actually co-facilitated the workshop on mental health, faith and therapy for 13 to 17-year-olds. And what we talked about is, what is cognitive behavioral therapy? Is it any different to counselling? We talked about what is anxiety, what is depression? Is there anything in the Bible that we can find out about anxiety and depression? Who in the Bible might have experienced it? We also talked about what are the common symptoms of both anxiety and depression, and what you can do in order to manage those symptoms of anxiety and depression. And we talked a little bit about stigma and beliefs that people, particularly Christians, might have about approaching services for mental health difficulties. And I don't know if Denisha wanted to add anything.
No, you covered it all. So as you said, we spoke about why maybe Christians might not want to go into therapy, and we've dispelled some of those myths.
Thank you so much. Sounds like it was very, very interesting. Now let me go through to Isaac. If you can tell us what you covered as well in your workshop, the main salient points in a minute or so.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. I can see Dr. Labinjo.
How are you?
Yes, I'm fine. Okay. Yes, so in my own session, I did cover anxiety and depression. And I started with distinction of mental health and mental illness because people do use it interchangeably. So I try to kind of make a demarcation of what mental health is using the WHO definition of mental health and mental illness as well. And I went into the definition of anxiety, and I did mention that anxiety is something that in as much as we are discussing it as an issue, but that doesn't mean that we still need a little bit of anxiety to function as human beings. Going by when human beings we are roaming on the earth as caveman, that the fight and flight issue the anxiety helps us for men to preserve themselves from predators like lions and stuff. However, if anxiety is interfering in your everyday life, is affecting your job, affecting your life in a way that you cannot reach your potential, going by WHO diagnosis, definition of anxiety or mental health, then it means that something is not right. So, so we went to the symptoms of anxiety, how you can manage it as well. And again, I went to different types of anxiety diagnosis that can give to people who have a sustained period of anxiety features. So we went through that as well. Then I went into depression, gave a distinction between how we use depression loosely. So when somebody is angry or didn't have their own way in something, they will say, oh, I'm feeling depressed. So I try to say that is not depression. So I mentioned that depression is a sustained period of sadness or unhappiness, hopelessness over a very sustained period of time. And I mentioned that depression can be diagnosed either by a GP or by a psychiatrist, and can be managed by a GP or a psychiatrist on a very severe level as well. And I mentioned—
sorry, Brother Isaac, let me stop you just right there. Thank you for your—
Don't start me. If you start me, I'll go.
I just need to, because I need to get a bit more from some people. And I know that I've started to get some questions in the YouTube chat, so I want to get through those as well. So thank you so much. Angela, if you can tell us in summary, a minute now, because Brother Isaac took some of your time, about what you covered in your thing. And if I ask you to also pop your camera back on for me as well.
My camera can't go on. It says that I've been...
Yes, and so we'll just ask you to just unpause your camera then, please. You should be able to unpause it.
It says you cannot start your video. Okay. Well, the session on eating disorders was about raising the profile of eating disorders and dispelling any myths related to eating disorders, looking at the signs and the symptoms and the complications of eating disorder, and the role that the media plays, and really enabling us to be able to recognize if someone is suffering from an eating disorder, or if we ourselves have a difficult relationship with food, recognizing that there is help out there, and also to be mindful how we talk about ourselves and other people in terms of their shape and their size, the sort of comments that we make, and also the impact that how we talk about ourselves and dieting, etc., can impact a young person.
Fantastic, thank you. And Denzel, if you would just cover just in a brief summary of what your session was.
All right, so it's getting shorter, I can see.
Yes.
So I covered self-harm and suicide. So we really looked at, what takes people to that point where they do contemplate ending their life or using self-harm as a coping strategy. So we looked at some of the statistics from World Health Organization, as well as locally here in England and Wales. We also covered stuff around, well, how can you see the signals, the warning sign of people you may come across, whether it's in your family, workplace, or just in the community, and what you do about that. How do you start a conversation with somebody who is at the point, maybe having suicidal ideation, sort of differentiate some of the terminologies and broke those down. But a big thing was about demystifying access to service in terms of stigma, stereotype. How do we break that down? How do we move from the fear of starting those conversations, really? It was a useful session.
Fantastic, thank you all so much. I just want to remind people that are watching through YouTube, the comments are open. If you have a question, please put a capital Q in front of your question, then I'll note the question and I'll be able to ask it. If you just want to put a comment, an agreement, whatever, just simply put that. I am going to say I was privileged to dip in and out of most of the workshops, and I've come away very enriched with more knowledge than I had when I started. One of the things that I've noticed is that there seems to be a bit of an overlap or an interweaving that one might lead to another. So, for example, depression might lead to somebody taking drugs or having suicidal ideas or having an eating disorder, and it's also linked. How do you then separate and deal with what the main cause is? So I'll just throw that out to anybody who wants to answer that first question. Which one do you deal with first? I can easily select if nobody wants to jump in and answer.
I can start.
Okay, go on, Dr. Labenja, I think, yeah.
The starting point is a thorough assessment. And never mind the labels, a thorough assessment looking at what are the challenges the person is facing and how they can be met. But the main thing is befriending the person, letting them understand that the problem is not their fault and that they're in a lot of problem and that you have most of the solution. If you're able to get to that, then you're able to move on to the next stage.
Thank you, Brother Isaac. I might not call you brother all the time, mind you, but forgive me if I don't.
Yeah, you call me Isaac, yes, sir. I think going, as a follow-up from what Dr. Labenja has just said, if you're able to identify all the issues, like you rightly said, all these problems are interlapping with each other, and you may not be treating everything at the same time because it could be a waste of time. However, with something like, I can give an example, something like anxiety and depression, it would be good for you to target one. Because if you're able to deal with one, it may kind of help the other one to rescind as well. So all you need to target is which one is more prominent amongst them. So if somebody is having a self-harming and a suicide problem, you need to target what is the precipitating factors. There may be factors, but target one of the prominent factor and deal with it, and other things may kind of manage itself normally because you have removed one significant factor that is affecting the person. Okay, it could be housing, it could be family relationship, but target one. Thank you.
Fantastic. So did you want to come in there?
Yeah, just quickly, just to say, I suppose just to add to what have been said, in terms of targeting what is currently happening for the individual, it's important to listen to what they say, to hear where they're at, and to see, well, what are their priorities, because they are actually the expert, no matter how professional we might be or, our experience, they really are the expert. And so listening to them in terms of what they want treated first, I think is paramount.
Thank you. I think that's a real good answer. All three of you, thank you for your contributions. I've got questions coming out of my ear as well as ones that I want to ask, but let me go to a couple that are in the chat. And this one I'm going to put to Denisha and Selena first, and then I'm going to ask Angela to then give a final answer. A person with a young teenager, at what age do they become body conscious? And I know, Angela, when you did your session, you talked about how men have eating disorders, but they're not maybe as well publicized or in the public arena as much as the eating disorders that women suffer. So I definitely like you to pick up on that aspect. If the teenager is a male, how then, at what age, what do we do? So it's Denisha and Selena first, please.
Okay, I'll preface this by saying I work with adults. That's my field, and I've always worked with adults. I kind of adapted my research and the materials to apply to people that are not adults. So I'll preface it by saying that. But in terms of my knowledge, the people that do often come into the service for support, we do take a bit of a history. We find out, okay, when did this begin? When did this start? And what we do know is that anxiety can start from a very early age, 8, 9, 10, that's when the anxiety can begin. So it can start really, really early. But I don't have like a statistic that I can give you about, yeah, this is when it definitely does begin, but it can happen. It can start from really, really early kind of young age. And especially, I think we need to be aware that we are absolutely in a culture and a society where information is just being thrown at us left, right, and center. We are consumed with information the moment we wake up. And so that is going to influence us. 100 years ago, if you didn't leave your house, you wouldn't know what was happening in the world. But now you can be in your house for a month and you know everything that's happening. You know what your friends are eating. So we need to just be aware that because of the times that we're living in, a lot more information is kind of being thrown at us, and it does have an impact. So if your child is 8 and they've got a phone, there's going to be an influence coming from that. If they got access to a TV, there's going to be influence coming from that, etc., etc. But I'll just let Denisha answer and say anything else if she wants to add.
I don't really have anything to add to that. I totally agree with you. I think it is social media, your friends, the things that everyone is seeing now, all that information and how everyone's being portrayed, because no one's portraying their not so nice bits on social media. It's all the nicely shaped, the flat stomachs, everything. That's what's really influencing our children and making them think that this is how we need to be. So completely agree with Sister Selina.
And Angela?
I think Selina makes a really important point about children now having access to social media in terms of mobile phones. And so they are now exposed to things that they wouldn't have been exposed to. So as far as your question with regards to men having an eating disorder, I think that when you look at magazines now, they used to be female magazines, but now you have got a lot of male magazines where men are becoming more body conscious. There's more of an expectation to have a certain shape, a certain size, certain weight. There's a lot of emphasis on sport. And so whilst men are, I think that men do not come to the surface, eating disorder surface as much as women do, purely because of the stigma, purely because eating disorders are seen as a female thing. And so men are reluctant to get help. However, with the increase of men developing an eating disorder and coming to service, what's been happening is there are organisations now that provide support for men, and there are I think it's called Men Get Eating Disorders Too, which is an organisation that provides support for men.
All right, thank you ever so much, everybody. I thought Sister Selina was saying, take away all the mobile phones, all the technology, anything that gave them access to anything that they really shouldn't have. So I've got a couple of questions. In terms, Dr. Labinjo, maybe Isaac Denzel, is treatment the same for young people as it is for adults? And Angela, again, if any of you want to answer that in terms of your specialist area. Let's unmute you, Dr. Labinjo. Look like you wanted to speak first. Can somebody unmute Dr. Labinjo, please? There goes.
Yeah. I agree with you. It works better when you unmute. But if I don't have a smile like yours, I think it's best to unmute. But I don't see a difference. Obviously, treatment has to be tailored towards the needs, which we may change between adults and children. Well, however, and it takes various forms from medication to drug to talking therapies. In the younger children, in the younger age, I think talking therapies. In the old age, like in the over 65, it tends to be so set that you need medication. But in between, pretty much it depends on who you're dealing with.
Thank you, everybody else. Yep.
Yeah, for me, I predominantly work with young people, at least for the past many years in my work. I work with young people. So with regards to treatment, I think Dr. Lamijo have just said it. You have to adapt it. Depression is depression. Anxiety is the same thing. Psychosis is the same. However, when it comes to things like therapies and stuff, you have to adapt it to a child level, depending on the child you're seeing. You need to adapt it so that the child can make sense of what you're saying. But again, the principles are the same. The research around treatment is the same. It's the same theory that all the treatment patterns follow, but you need to adapt it so that the child can make sense of that therapy. Thank you.
All right, let me go to the chat. There's 2 questions, so I'm going to post both questions at the same time. And then if I can get selection answering one and another selection answering the other one. So the first one says, are Black people more predisposed to mental health issues? So Isaac, you might be the first on that one. And then the second question is, are eating disorders related to mental disability or psychological problems, or both? So Isaac, do you want to start with the answer to the first one?
Yes. The question, for me to answer that, I have to kind of give you some kind of a background. So when you look at how people are being predisposed to mental health issue, you need to look into a lot of things: poor housing, environment, where they come from, their value system, employment, poverty level, and everything. So when you look at all these things, when you put a Black person on one side and put maybe another person from another ethnicity, like a white person on another side, and you start looking at all these variables I put into in terms of the social issues, education, housing, you know that the Black person has a very poor housing, education is poor, poverty is there. So when you look at that, the variables I've learned, you find that a Black person is more predisposed. Not that a Black person is genetically more likely to have mental health problem, but they are more predisposed because of their environment, because of their experiences, because of poverty, because of lack of food, because of lack of opportunity in their life, because of trauma they are exposed to. So those are those variables you need to eliminate. And that is what makes it. I have worked in the prison service, and I can tell you, I did a research in the prison when I was working with young people in prison in HMP Cookenwood in Rochester. And one of the things we found out is specifically in ISIS now in London 1. So you have the population of UK, you have Black people make about 8% or 9% of the total population. However, when you come into the prison, you find out that the Black people make up to more than 60% of the population group. And you start asking yourself why, that you are least in the population, in the overall population, but you are more in the prison environment. And the simplest answer to it is because of exposure to all these things I have mentioned to you. So that is why statistically, it is believed that Black people are more predisposed to mental health problems, but it's because of all these other issues that I have mentioned that make them more predisposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. Angela, would you take the other question for me, please? If you can remember what it was.
An eating disorder is a serious mental illness, and You know, it's characterized by disordered eating behavior. And there are a range of factors that contribute to an eating disorder. It can be biological in terms of a family history, a genetic disposition. It can also be psychological in terms of the person experiencing a low self-esteem, a negative relationship with themselves, feelings of inadequacy. They also too may experience depression, anxiety and fear. There's social, cultural factors. We live in a society where there's great overemphasis around somebody's appearance. There's dissatisfaction about a person's body in terms of their shape. And also there are issues around trauma, abuse, bullying, stigma, loss in life. So it is a life-threatening illness. I know sometimes people think eating disorders are about fussy eaters and girls wanting to be thin, but it's not. It is a serious illness that can be potentially fatal. It can cause a person to experience very strong emotions, extreme behaviors and attitudes towards their relationship with weight, their food and their size. You know, eating disorders are not all about food. It's about how a person is feeling and how they relate to food in a way of coping with emotional distress.
Fantastic, thank you so much. All right, another question. And this is for Denzel, and probably I suppose for everybody. What do you think is the reason for, it seems like, this rise in teenage suicides? And again, I suppose it's also that publicity of the celebrities, Instagram, Twitter, all of those things. But Denzel, from your opinion, what do you think is one of the reasons for the rise?
I suppose over the years, as you've just mentioned, in terms of access to sort of the social media and people being certainly more informed, it has certainly increased people's awareness of those who are actually choosing to perhaps end their lives. Young people we know in general have always been at risk of self-harm, self-harming behavior. But I would suggest that if you look back over the decades, there has been a steady rise. And I think there's sort of been a breakdown in terms of the familial setting, in terms of how people manage their emotions. There's lots of dysregulation. So people tend to cope in a variety of ways, and people tend to, young people often choose to cope in silence when they're really, really struggling. And so there's actually been a shift, this kind of shift in the family structure. People are, they're single parents. There is confusion, lots of confusion around, what it means to be in a family. There's confusion around on sexual orientation, the transgender issue. There's a complex, an array of issues. And like has been mentioned before, we have been bombarded with all sorts of stuff. And so our coping level, especially in this society, seems to have worn thin. And certainly in our group and session, we talked about the stress bucket. And it would seem that our young people are struggling with having, the coping tools, the adequate tools in their bag to actually use, apart from turning to something like self-harming or the ultimate resolve, which is ending it by terminating their life. So my suggestion would be, actually, let's look back at the family, what's going on there. We know from studies that lots of abuse seems to be a factor in terms of those who self-harm and loss of trauma and loss. So we need to look at what's going on in that basic family structure and in our communities. How do we support each other and our family at that level?
Dr. Labinja, I have a question for you, and don't worry, those that have put in YouTube, I am going to get to your question. Dr. Labinja, is there a disparity when it comes to treatment with regards to ethnicity for mental health, especially in terms of maybe the strength or the type of medication that they give to the people whose skin are a little bit darker than the Queen's? Just unmute you, Dr. Labinja. Okay.
Yep. The straight answer is yes, there is a difference. And the difference is being perpetuated by the mental health professionals as well. Black patients, particularly Black psychotic patients, are more likely to get the cheap first generation antipsychotics that cost 4 pence, rather than the third generation aripiprazole that could cost you a couple of grand. And the reality of it is we're seeing that. In terms of what you can do about it, it's a very strange issue because the funding for mental health is tight and people are making choices to balance the books. And at the wrong end of the wedge is where the Black people who are more unlikely to have representation, more unlikely to speak up about side effects, and generally not to be heard. And whether you like it or not, if there's racism in society, there'll be racism among mental health professionals. And in my experience in the NHS, it has not got better. It possibly has got worse, and that's talking of 42 years in the NHS. I really despair, and some of our Black colleagues are colluding with that.
That's a sad state of affairs. I've got one question for Angela, and that is there a link with eating disorders and self-harm? And then the last question, I think, because I've been told my time's running out, the last question then for everybody is, what can we do? What can we do? In all of the things that you've been speaking about today, what can we do? So Angela, if you'd start off with answering the question about it leading to self-harm.
Well, eating disorders have the highest death rate of any other mental illness. 10 to 15% of people with an eating disorder will die of a physical complication, and 1/3 will die because of suicide. So in terms of your, is there a link? Absolutely, there isn't a link. People with an eating disorder feel a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. They have a low self-esteem, and they're experiencing a lot of fear. And 1/3 will go on to kill themselves, and that's really high.
Just before you all answer my question, I have the last question from the chat. So it's a long question, but I'll try and read it without making, they're trying to be sneaky here and squeezing in 2 questions. Okay, how do we listen to a young person or any person and what they want first or want to address when they are dealing with such issues? How do we take them seriously, taking on board what they think, feel, and say? Okay, let me read it again. How do we listen to a young person or any person and what they want first or want to address when they are dealing with such issues? and how do we take them seriously and taking on board what they think, feel, and say? And that's a serious question because sometimes young people don't even want to talk to you as an adult. So all of you, how do we do?
I think that Dr. Labenja talked about relationship, the therapeutic relationship when you're working with somebody. The therapeutic relationship is more important. Establishing trust is more important. That's one of the first steps. And I would say that if you know of somebody or there is somebody struggling, I think it's about your relationship with that person, building trust. Are you somebody that is going to spill the beans on everything they've said? Obviously, in issues around risk, you cannot have secrets around risk to self, risk to others. But in terms of talking to a young person, a good relationship, there's no point you going to them and talking to them about difficult, personal, sensitive issues when you know nothing about them, you've not built a relationship with them. So from my point of view, it's about relationship, it's about being non-judgmental, it's about being non-critical, it's about listening, giving them the space to express how they're feeling. Often they don't even know how they're feeling, they're unsure, they find difficulty in trying to articulate what they're feeling inside. So for me, it's about being patient with them. Don't get angry with them because they say something that makes you afraid, or they will not talk to you if you respond and react in anger with strong emotions towards things that they're feeling and experiencing, that they're worried about. I think if a child is talking to you, then that's great. You may not like what you're hearing, but the fact that they have been courageous and they've been able to express how they're feeling is a really important step.
I'll just add to that quickly. And I think in terms of the question, in terms of listening, it's about body language, because we can be sitting and hearing what they're saying, but we're doing something else. So it's important in communication that we utilize those basic skills, making sure, checking in with the person, making sure that, letting them actually, I understand, I hear where you're at, giving them feedback, and that's so important, because visually, listening is not only about using our ears, it's demonstrating that you're actively participating, you're interested in the person, so the young person needs to know that you will be there, that level of consistency, that you will not let them down. And in terms of suicide, I'd say just, you need to stay with them. Don't avoid the subject, don't beat around the bush. If they tell you that they feel, like in their life, take them, the question is about seriously, take them seriously, act, do what it takes to keep them safe.
Fantastic. And that in one sense covers, I suppose, the question that I was going to ask. And this person's really going to get me in trouble for overrunning. But the question was saying, how do we support in a way that it's inclusive rather than us undermining, especially if it's a young person? We're the professionals, we're the adults, we know best. And I suppose what you've both answered really does cover that. So thank you very, very much. I'm going to really be naughty and sneak in 2 questions. So remember my first one was, what can we do? Because sometimes we have a lot of information, knowledge, but the practicality is really missing. So what can we really do? And then the last question is, how important is our faith in all of this? So in drugs and alcohol, in terms of anxiety, in terms of suicide, eating disorders, anxiety and depression in young people, how important is our faith in all of this? So I'm sure they're going to tell me I've really got 1 minute, but I might stretch it to about 3 so everybody gets a chance to answer. So who's going to be first? I'm going to unmute Dr. Binjo, accept that, and then we'll start with you.
Can you hear me? A very short answer. Faith is very important in every aspect of it, because as practitioners, we are anointed practitioners of faith who just happen to have a skill that we've gone to medical school for, but who God has placed in a place to make an impact. And I believe that to my core. And I think I became a better doctor when I got born again. I've forgotten your first question. I'm an old man.
Don't worry, I almost forgot it as well. What can we do? What can we really do? The practicalities. What can we really do?
The real thing is do not do nothing. Nothing is not an option. Engage in what form, even if it's, are you okay? And then take it from there. If you cannot engage, you cannot connect, you cannot progress.
Fantastic. I like that answer. Isaac, Denzel, Angela, Denisha, Selena.
Yeah, I'll
Be a
just
good role
chip in
model.
and say, be a good role model, absolutely. I'll just chip in and say that absolutely faith is really important. We do find our identity in Christ, essentially. And Denisha and I talked quite a bit about, what does the Bible say? Is there anybody in the Bible that experienced anxiety? Is there anybody in the Bible that experienced depression? And I'm sure that perhaps your mind might be thinking, what about Job? What about David? What about Moses? What about Martha? There are characters in the Bible that experience. So it's not kind of completely removed from being a Christian. But the Bible also talks about whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, think on these things. And I'm going to talk about CBT because that's what I know. CBT absolutely encourages us to think positively, to think about the good things. Depression and anxiety is going to take you away from the present moment and take you somewhere else, far down the road. Oh, what if I fail my exam? What if this person doesn't turn up? What if the food turns out bad? You're not in the present moment. Let's think about the good stuff. Let's drown out those negative voices and read the Psalms, sing the Psalms to yourself. So absolutely your faith plays a really good part. And in terms of what can we do? Yes, connect with people, talk to people. If you are feeling depressed, and if you're feeling down, your mind is going to say, oh, I don't want to do it. I can't be bothered. Oh, let me just stay here a bit longer. Oh, do you know what? It didn't work out. And your mind is going to tell you not to bother. Again, the thing that your mind is telling you to do, that's a bully. That's the bully that's telling you not to do anything. What you want to do is do the opposite. Your mind is saying, oh, let me just lay here 5 minutes longer. Make a plan. I want to do these things. Go ahead and do it. See how you feel. Even if it's 5 minutes. Oh, the house is a mess. I can't be bothered to tidy it up. 5 minutes later, I'm just going to vacuum for 5 minutes. See what your energy levels are like after that. Because what happens is your depression tells you not to bother. But once you start going, you kind of get a bit of momentum.
Yeah.
So do exactly the opposite of what that bully is telling you to do. Those are my few words.
Not sure I'd call them few, but yeah. Isaac and Denzel and Denisha. Denisha, you've been very quiet.
Okay, if we are talking about how important is our faith in our day, I think one of the values as a Christian is that it gives you a lot of sense of hope. And within all this, we are talking about mental health. Hope is a very important ingredient. If you look in the Bible, like Selena have been saying about the Bible, one of the key sermons on the Mount is where Christ said, do not be anxious about tomorrow. And anxious about is anxiety. Do not be anxious about what's going to happen tomorrow, because your Father in heaven is going to provide for you. So Christ obviously recognized what anxiety is, and he addressed it very clearly that the best way to manage anxiety is not to be thinking about tomorrow. You just have that hope that tomorrow will take care of itself. So once we have that hope, and you maintain that hope and keep staying in that hope, just like Selena using CBT, staying in that moment of hope, that will go a long way in helping you. Again, talking about
fantastic there. I'm gonna stop you again. Sorry, Denzel, Denzel and Angela and Denisha. I want to hear from Denisha.
Yes, so certainly, as Dr. Labinja was saying earlier about, being in this profession, this element of being compassionate, which is certainly grounded in my faith and our faith, just being able to sit and walk with somebody, having that empathy to be there with that person while they're going through their struggles. And that is for me, gives me that ability to help to carry that burden. The Bible talks about, Jesus is a burden bearer, and our faith, allows people to be able to manage life, cope with issues, because you've got somebody else walking alongside with you. If you fall, your faith will pick you up and he will carry you. But no, certainly in terms of burdenness, in what I've been talking about in terms of suicide, people do tend to feel that they're a burden in this world and, a sense of not belonging. But faith can give individuals that meaning in life. Denisha probably know, and Selena, mindfulness, that's being used in our field often, but that's all about meditation, and that's all about taking ourselves away from the business of life and taking that moment to dive into the Word and to spend time with our Father. That's so crucial. Spirituality is a huge protective factor in mental health.
Fantastic.
Sorry.
Am I going to let Denisha have the last word? So Angela, you can only say 2 words because I want to hear at least 5 from Denisha.
My 2 words are, everything that has been said so far, I agree with completely in regards to faith and its importance.
Fantastic. Denisha.
So everyone has summed up faith. I think in terms of practical things, as we've said, have those conversations about mental health, because one thing that holds the minority community down is that there's so much stigma about mental health, and that prevents people from actually seeking help when they need it. And that's why all these statistics are out there that Black people or minority ethnic people are experiencing more severe mental illness, but it's because we're not accessing help when it first begins, because there's fear about what other people will say. How does this reflect on my faith? What's my community going to say about me? So having those conversations and being a representative in your community, so have these conversations with your children and take them seriously, because I've had a lot of young people coming with stress, and I used to think, oh, growing up, you have that idea that you've got a roof over your head, clothes on your back, you should be fine, but they're figuring out who they are. They're worried about who they're going to become, what's their career going to be like. They have some very important stress, things that are important to them. So take them seriously when they are speaking. Listen to others and don't discredit the things that they're saying, and point them in the right direction. So seek out services that can support or be that support that they need as well. So I think that's everything in summary.
It was a good reason why I left you for last. I do again want to say thank you all so much. I've gone away with so much, and I like this. Doing nothing is not an option. We can all do something. Thank you so much. I want to remind everybody that's connecting via YouTube, 6 p.m. Join us again for our celebration, our evening of celebration. We have a special, I was going to say guest artist, but he's not really going to be singing as far as I know. But David Chishanya will be with us, and I probably mashed up his surname, but forgive me. So please join us again, 6 p.m. for a great night of celebration via YouTube. If you don't have the link, pop something in the chat on YouTube, and we'll try and get an answer through to you. Or contact your local pastor, and they'll be able to supply you with the link. Dr. Labinjo, thank you so much. Your smile is a beautiful smile. I love listening to you.
You're
Isaac,
now.
thank you so much, Isaac. Sorry, I have to keep cutting you off. Denzel, thank you again so much, teaching me so much about suicide. Angela, eating disorders. You can see I might have an eating disorder. We'll figure that out later. Denisha, thank you so much for your input. Selena, as well, thank you for your input. Organisers, thank you for letting me loose on YouTube. Be blessed. I'm sure I'm going to say